This image sold for $1,300,000, $1.3 million, for a JPEG of a bored-looking cartoon ape wearing a black t-shirt. The man who bought it? Justin Bieber. Today, that same image is worth approximately $12,000. He lost over $1 million on a cartoon. And here's the thing. Justin Bieber wasn't even close to the biggest loser in the NFT story. He was just the most famous one. At the peak of the NFT craze, the global market was worth over $41 billion. There were reportedly 12,000 NFT sales every single day. Christie's auction house, the same institution that sells Van Goghs and Rembrandts, auctioned a digital file for $69 million. Celebrities, hedge funds, Fortune 500 brands, and ordinary people around the world poured money into pixelated images, cartoon animals, and digital receipts. Then, almost overnight, 95% of all NFTs became essentially worthless. Not down 20%, not down 50%. Worthless, as in no buyers, no bids, nothing. This is the story of how it happened, who got rich, who got destroyed, and, most importantly, what it tells us about the way human psychology and financial markets interact when a new technology shows up and promises to change everything. Quick thing before we start. If you watched our video on the metaverse collapse and you're back for more of this kind of deep dive financial storytelling, welcome back. Subscribe if you haven't yet. This is exactly the kind of content we do here every week. One question for the comments. Did you ever own an NFT? Or did you almost buy one and stop yourself? Either answer is equally interesting to me. No shame either way. Some of the smartest investors on Earth got burned on this. Drop it below. And now, let's go back to where this whole thing started. Before we can understand how NFTs became a $41 billion market and then collapsed, we need to understand what they actually are, because the technology itself is not the crazy part. NFT stands for non-fungible token. Fungible is an economic term that means interchangeable. A dollar bill is fungible. You can trade it for any other dollar bill and nothing changes. A Bitcoin is fungible. A barrel of crude oil is fungible. Non-fungible means the opposite, unique, one of a kind, not interchangeable with anything else. A painting is non-fungible. A signed baseball card is non-fungible. The original copy of the US Constitution is non-fungible. An NFT is essentially a digital certificate of ownership recorded on a blockchain, a decentralized public ledger that is extremely difficult to tamper with. When you buy an NFT, what you're actually buying is a record on the blockchain that says, this specific digital asset belongs to this specific wallet address. The technology is genuinely clever. For the first time, it became possible to create verifiable scarcity in the digital world, a domain where, previously, anything could be copied infinitely for free. You can right-click and save any image from the internet, but you can't right-click and save ownership of it. That distinction is what NFTs were supposed to solve. The problem started when people took that clever idea and applied it to cartoon apes, and decided those cartoon apes were worth millions of dollars. The NFT market had existed quietly since around 2014, a niche corner of the crypto world, mostly used by artists and collectors who were genuinely interested in digital ownership. Total trading volume in 2020 was around $94 million. Interesting, but not explosive. Then came March 2021, and a digital artist named Mike Winkelmann, known online as Beeple. Beeple had spent 13 years making one digital image every single day, without exception. The collection, called Every Days, the first 5,000 days, was a massive mosaic of 5,000 individual pieces. It was, by any measure, an impressive creative achievement. Christie's auction house, one of the oldest and most prestigious art institutions in the world, founded in 1766, agreed to auction it. The bidding started at $100. What followed was extraordinary. A recording from Christie's captures the moment. Beeple watches the bids come in on a screen, and as the numbers climb past $50 million, $55 million, $60 million, he starts shaking his head in disbelief. The hammer came down at $69.3 million. "Oh my God, $69 million?" Beeple said. "I think it probably means digital art is here to stay. I'm going to Disneyland." That auction did something no amount of crypto marketing ever could. It gave NFTs legitimacy. Christie's wasn't a cryptocurrency exchange. It was the institution that sold Picassos. And if Christie's was treating digital art as real art, real enough to sell for $69 million, then maybe the skeptics were the ones who didn't understand. The frenzy began almost immediately. What happened in the months after the Beeple sale was one of the strangest financial episodes in recent memory. The NFT market, which had generated $94 million in all of 2020, generated $24.9 billion in 2021. That's a 26,000% increase in a single year. At one point in early 2022, the peak marketplace OpenSea was processing $405 million in daily trading volume. For reference, that's more than the daily trading volume of some mid-sized stock exchanges. Two collections came to define the era. The first was CryptoPunks, 10,000 algorithmically generated pixel art characters, created in 2017 by a two-person studio called Yuga Labs. Originally given away for free, CryptoPunks became the earliest blue-chip NFT. By early 2022, the cheapest one in the collection, the floor price, was over $240,000. One sold for the equivalent of $23.7 million. The second, and most culturally dominant, was the Bored Ape Yacht Club. BAYC was launched in April 2021 by a company called Yuga Labs. The collection consisted of 10,000 cartoon apes, each with randomly generated traits, different fur colors, backgrounds, clothing, accessories. Owning one didn't just give you the image. It gave you membership in a digital club, access to exclusive events, future NFT drops, and perhaps most powerfully, a status symbol in the world of crypto culture. The floor price of a Bored Ape, the cheapest available, reached $420,000 at its peak in April 2022. And then the celebrities arrived. Jimmy Fallon showed off his Bored Ape on The Tonight Show. Steph Curry bought one for $178,000 and made it his Twitter profile picture. Madonna paid an undisclosed amount for one. Snoop Dogg, Post Malone, Gwyneth Paltrow, Paris Hilton, Serena Williams, DJ Khaled, an extraordinary list of A-list names, all publicly affiliated with cartoon apes. Justin Bieber bought his a sad-looking ape in a black t-shirt for $1.29 million. For ordinary observers, the message was clear. The smartest, coolest, richest people in the world were buying NFTs. If you weren't, you were missing out. Here's a question that sounds obvious in retrospect, but wasn't obvious at the time. Why would anyone pay $420,000 for a cartoon? The answer requires understanding several overlapping psychological forces. The first is social proof. When someone you admire, a celebrity, an athlete, a respected investor, makes a purchase, it signals to your brain that the purchase is rational. This is deeply wired behavior. We learn from observing others. The problem is that it creates a feedback loop. Celebrities buying NFTs make regular people buy NFTs, which raises prices, which makes the celebrities look smart, which makes more regular people buy NFTs. The second is scarcity and exclusivity. The Bored Ape Yacht Club was always exactly 10,000 apes. No more would ever be created. In a world of infinite digital copies, this scarcity was artificial, but it was real scarcity enforced by the blockchain. And humans respond powerfully to scarcity. We assign higher value to things that are rare. When scarcity is combined with social proof, rare things owned by cool, rich, famous people, the psychological pull becomes almost overwhelming. The third is what behavioral economists call narrative transportation, the degree to which you get absorbed into a story about the future. The NFT narrative was compelling. We're moving to a digital world. Digital ownership is going to be as important as physical ownership. Get in now or get left behind. When a narrative is immersive enough, the critical part of your brain, the part that asks underscore, quote underscore for, underscore, tends to go quiet. And the fourth, underpinning everything, was the same force we talked about in our metaverse video, the greater fool theory. In a rising market, you don't need to believe in intrinsic value. You just need to believe someone else will pay more than you. Until they won't. By late 2021, even as prices were still climbing, some uncomfortable questions were starting to surface. The most basic one, what do you actually own? When you buy an NFT, you buy a token on the blockchain that points to a file, usually stored somewhere else entirely, like a standard web server. You don't own the copyright to the image. The artist keeps the copyright. You can't legally prevent anyone from copying it. You can't display it in any meaningful way. You own a blockchain record that says you own it. Critics pointed out that right-clicking and saving the image was, from a practical standpoint, nearly identical to buying it. You got the same visual experience. You just didn't have the blockchain receipt. Defenders argued that the receipt was the point, that verified ownership was what created value, the same way a signed original painting is more valuable than a perfect reproduction. There's something to that argument. But it raised an obvious follow-up question. Valuable to whom? A painting by Rembrandt is valuable because of a centuries-long consensus about artistic merit, rarity, and cultural significance. A Bored Ape was valuable because of a consensus that had formed in about 6 months, primarily among cryptocurrency enthusiasts, sustained largely by celebrity endorsement and media hype. That's a much more fragile foundation. Then there was the wash trading problem. Analysts began documenting evidence that significant portions of NFT trading volume were artificially inflated. People trading NFTs back and forth between their own wallets to create the illusion of demand and drive up prices. This wasn't a fringe activity. One study found that a substantial minority of total NFT volume showed statistical signatures consistent with wash trading. And then there were the celebrities. Were their purchases and endorsements genuine investments? Or paid promotions disguised as organic enthusiasm? That question would eventually end up in court. In December 2022, a class action lawsuit was filed in California federal court against Yuga Labs, the creator of Bored Ape Yacht Club, and a staggering list of celebrity defendants. The named defendants included Madonna, Justin Bieber, Jimmy Fallon, Paris Hilton, Gwyneth Paltrow, Serena Williams, Steph Curry, DJ Khaled, Snoop Dogg, and Post Malone, among others. The allegation at the core of the lawsuit was this. Yuga Labs had worked with a Hollywood talent manager named Guy Oseary and a crypto payments company called MoonPay to arrange paid celebrity endorsements of Bored Ape NFTs. These endorsements, social media posts, TV appearances, public statements, were presented to the public as genuine enthusiasm. In reality, according to the plaintiffs, they were paid promotions, with compensation flowing through MoonPay to avoid disclosure requirements. The lawsuit alleged that this manufactured celebrity endorsement campaign artificially inflated the price of Bored Apes, inducing ordinary investors to buy in at the peak. When prices collapsed, those investors lost billions. People just thought they could get away with anything because it was crypto and because these were tokens, said John Jasnock, an attorney for the plaintiffs. Yuga Labs called the claims opportunistic and parasitic and denied wrongdoing. None of the celebrity defendants commented publicly at the time. Whether the specific legal allegations are proven or not, the broader picture the lawsuit paints is consistent with what had been observed throughout the NFT boom, a market where the line between organic enthusiasm and manufactured hype was nearly impossible to discern from the outside, and where ordinary buyers were the last to know. The NFT market peaked in January 2022. OpenSea, the dominant marketplace, recorded $5 billion in trading volume in that single month alone. By September 2022, just 8 months later, monthly trading volume had fallen to $466 million, a drop of over 97%. What happened? Several things simultaneously. The first was macroeconomic. In early 2022, central banks around the world, including the US Federal Reserve, began raising interest rates aggressively to combat surging inflation. When money is expensive, risk appetite collapses. Investors sell speculative assets first. Crypto crashed, and NFTs, being speculative assets priced in crypto, crashed doubly hard. The second was the collapse of specific crypto projects. In May 2022, a cryptocurrency called Terra/Luna, which had $40 billion in market capitalization, essentially went to zero in 72 hours. It wiped out tens of billions of dollars in wealth almost instantly, and the shockwaves spread through every corner of the crypto world. NFT buyers, who had been using those assets as collateral, suddenly needed to sell everything. Then, in November 2022, came FTX, the collapse of what had been the world's second-largest crypto exchange, a fraud that would eventually land its founder, Sam Bankman-Fried, in prison, sent another wave of panic through the markets. But beneath the macro forces, there was a simpler problem. The demand had never been real in the first place. There were only so many people willing to pay $420,000 for a cartoon. And once prices started falling, the greater fool logic inverted. Nobody wanted to be the greater fool on the way down. Buyers disappeared. Prices didn't just fall, they collapsed. The floor price of a Bored Ape, which had peaked at $420,000, fell to under $100,000 by mid-2022. By 2023, it was around $80,000. Justin Bieber's $1.29 million ape was worth approximately $12,000 by early 2026, a loss of over 99%. The statistics across the broader market were even more brutal. Trading volume on OpenSea fell from a daily peak of $405 million to just $5 million by 2023. Active traders in the art NFT market fell from 529,000 at peak to under 20,000 by early 2025, a 96% decline. The market research firm Dapp Gamble concluded that 95% of all NFTs on the market were now essentially worthless. No active market, no buyers, effectively zero. The $41 billion market had become a rounding error. As always, the important question is, where did the money go? The answer is familiar from every speculative bubble in history. The early creators won. Beeple sold his NFT for $69 million and walked away. Yuga Labs, the creators of Bored Ape Yacht Club, generated hundreds of millions of dollars in primary and secondary sales royalties during the peak. The founders, who operated under online pseudonyms for much of the boom, built significant wealth in a very short period of time. The platforms won. OpenSea, at its peak, was valued at $13 billion by its investors. It charged a 2.5% fee on every transaction. At $17 billion in monthly volume, the math is extraordinary. The early flippers won. The people who got in during 2020 or early 2021, before the celebrity wave, and sold near the peak. These were often technically sophisticated crypto natives who understood the market dynamics and knew when to exit. And then there were the celebrities, some of whom, the lawsuit alleges, were compensated for their enthusiasm regardless of what happened to prices afterward. The people who lost were, as always, the ones who arrived late. The retail investors who saw Jimmy Fallon show off his Bored Ape on The Tonight Show in November 2021 and decided this was their chance. The ones who stretched their budgets to buy in at or near the peak, believing in a narrative that the insiders had already stopped believing. The ones, as the lawsuit put it, who were induced to purchase, quote, 9. Some of the people who lost the most weren't wealthy speculators. They were ordinary people who had been told loudly and repeatedly that this was the future, and who trusted that message. This is the most nuanced part of the story, and I want to give it an honest treatment. NFTs, as a technology, are not inherently worthless. The underlying concept, verified digital ownership enforced by a decentralized ledger, has genuine applications. In gaming, NFTs could allow players to truly own in-game assets, characters, weapons, real estate inside virtual worlds, items that can be traded or sold outside the game's ecosystem. In music, NFTs could give artists a direct relationship with their most dedicated fans, with royalty mechanisms built into the token itself, meaning the artist earns every time their work is resold. In ticketing, NFTs could permanently solve the scalping problem or enable experiences tied to authentic ownership. These are real use cases, and some of them are being quietly built, even as the speculative market has collapsed. But here's the distinction that matters. The NFT boom of 2021 and 2022 was not primarily about any of those things. It was about cartoon apes as status symbols. It was about buying a JPEG and hoping someone would pay more for it tomorrow. It was a speculative asset market, dressed in the language of a technological revolution. The technology was real. The use cases were real. Some of them, eventually. But the valuations had almost nothing to do with the technology. They were driven by hype, celebrity, FOMO, and the momentum of cheap money looking for somewhere to go. When the cheap money stopped, the hype evaporated. The celebrities moved on, the FOMO inverted. And what was left was the technology, quietly building utility applications, and a graveyard of $420,000 cartoon apes worth $12,000. We've now covered the metaverse. We've covered NFTs. Two of the biggest financial manias of the 2020s, both centered on digital assets, both fueled by the same underlying forces: new technology, cheap money, celebrity endorsement, social proof, and the deep human fear of missing out. And in both cases, the same thing happened. The people who got in early and got out before the peak made extraordinary returns. The people who arrived late, convinced by the noise, doing what everyone around them seemed to be doing, lost enormous amounts of money. I want to say something careful here, because I don't want this to sound like a simple lesson about not investing in new things. That's not the takeaway. The internet was a bubble, and it also changed the world. Amazon was almost bankrupt in 2001. Apple almost died before the iPhone. The history of technology is littered with companies and assets that were wildly overvalued during their initial hype cycle, and technologies that were ultimately more transformative than even their most enthusiastic early believers imagined. The lesson isn't, don't invest in new things. The lesson is, understand the difference between the technology and the price. The internet was real. The $350 valuations on companies with no revenue were not. Virtual reality is real. Spending $4 million on digital land in a platform with 38 users was not. Blockchain ownership is a real innovation. Paying $1.3 million for a cartoon because a celebrity posted about it on Instagram was not. Price and value can diverge dramatically. And in speculative markets, especially in the early stages of genuinely new technologies, they almost always do. One last thought. As of today, in 2026, there is a new narrative running at full volume through every corner of the financial media and tech culture. A new technology that is undeniably real, undeniably powerful, and attracting capital at a pace that makes even the NFT boom look modest. I'm not going to tell you what to think about it, but I will tell you, the pattern is always the same, and you've now seen it twice. The question is what you do with that. If you found this useful, share it with someone who needs to see it. The metaverse video is right there if you missed it. And next up, we're going to look at the broader history of speculative bubbles. From Dutch tulips to dot-com stocks, and what the pattern tells us about where we are today. See you in that one.